Hello, hello, everybody. We're still here, so we keep going, as I like to say every week. I'm hoping one of these days we'll all meet soon in the sky, but until then, we're going to do stuff like this. And this week is prophecy, specifically about Palestine and what that has to do with Psalm 83, which may or may not be in progress. How are you doing, Droid?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. May the Lord bless you this day.
Amen. And everybody in chat, good to see you guys. And we'll just go ahead and get started here. And I want to just say, first of all, that you know how we like to do things here is to get different sources and different angles of things. And so that's why, especially with prophecy and current events, that we have to be careful that we don't do newspaper eschatology on one hand, which is just taking everything that we see as a fulfillment of prophecy, or on the other hand, just ignoring or writing it all off and hand wave dismissing it as just stuff that happens and nothing ever comes of it. As it says, I think in Second Peter, in the end times, people will say there'll be scoffers who say, "Where is this coming that he promised? Everything goes on as it always has." And then it says that they deliberately forget that that God once flooded the world, and that also before that the world was made of water and by water, and all sorts of interesting things. But the point is that we need to be thorough, we need to be careful, and it's not always easy, even if you're into research and that sort of thing. It's not easy to find all the sources you need to find to get a good picture of something. But somewhere in my notes, which I can't even find, okay, the Second Peter 3 is where that was. Um, but what I got on the screen here is one article. We're not going to look at just one, but I'm going to read this first paragraph and then go over to something that has another view of that claim, which is common. It's going to be in the third link we look at. So let me, in case you didn't have it, I think all these links are in the description, but I'll just give you this one to start. And I added some to the description since I first put it up, so you might need to refresh your page if you haven't done it, if you've had it up a while. So what we have here is science.co. something or other I can't see with my blurry vision about Israel and Palestine. And it says, and it has a little map here, which is, as many times as I've looked at this topic, seems to be accurate enough for our purposes today. And this is going to get into the Balfour Declaration and the mandate for Palestine and all that. So it says here, after the revolt of Bar Kokhba against the Roman Empire, 132 to 135 SAD, they say CE, when usually it's a Jewish source, it says CE, or an atheist source, Common Era, which is a way of avoiding Anno Domini, AD, the year of our Lord. They don't like that, so they use CE. And what event happened at that point to make it the current era? None of them can say. But anyway, it was about 132 to 135, the years AD. The Judea province was renamed Syria Palestina by the Roman Emperor Hadrian to detach the Judean province from Jewish identity. And we're going to stop there for a second and look at this article that says, nah, okay? Now, this is Tale of Times Forgotten, and if we go down to the end here, it has a lot of information we'll look at. But first, I didn't scroll down far enough. We'll do this the better way of dragging the scroll bar. And it says this person is an aspiring historian, and so they hope to get into this more later. And he or she has a high distinction from Indiana University in May 2022 with a Bachelor of Arts in History and Classical Studies. So nothing to sneeze at, but still a fairly young person and that aspiring historian. So just to keep that in mind, and I want to highlight this section of it about the claims about hate. Well, I guess I'll go back. I want to come back to that highlighted section. You see this little red mark on the map, if you can see that. This is the Mediterranean Sea, and that's the area called Palestine or Israel, or the Levant is that kind of a larger area of that, I think. This person is trying to be not biased on either side, although I think I can figure out from reading it that they have their side of it is not necessarily in favor of Israel. So just to make that point, they want to address a factually incorrect claim that for years they've seen on various people make, namely that the Roman Emperor Hadrian, who ruled for 21 years from 117 to 138 AD, was the first to apply the name Palestine to the entire land between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. When he named the land that was previously known as Judea, Syria, Palestina, supposedly specifically in order to punish the Jewish people for the Bar Kokhba revolt. And it was either this one or the other article that says, or it could have been the other way around, that the revolt was because they named it Palestine. So there's a lot of uncertainty about who did what and why and when regarding the name of the area. And then they give a Greek derivation of the word, and that had been used prior to Roman rule in the area for a long time. It says before Hadrian was born, that it was, that their naming of that wasn't, it's more like, as I think, again, either this one or the other article says, is like naming something the Midwest in the United States. Where is the Midwest? Well, it's kind of roughly, vaguely, not the coastlands. And kind of, if you're between the mountains, I would say, in the United States. So on one side, on the east, we have the Appalachians, and on the other side, we have the Rockies. Somewhere in there, between those two mountain ranges, is the quote unquote Midwest. Although when you get closer to the Rockies, it's more just the West. And it has as much to do with people's values and culture as it has to do with the land that they live in, because you'll find exceptions in every part of the country. But the Midwest is generally between those mountain ranges and more toward the Mississippi on the western side. It would be closer you get to the mountains and the Rockies, the less Midwestern you are. Anyway, the point being that the Midwest is as specific a name as Palestine, which is to say not specific, but a general geographic area, and says nothing about a kingdom or a nation called Palestine or a particular people group called Palestinians. That's the main point about this, okay? And they look at the connection here in this article about between Philistia and Palestine being phonetically pretty much the same area. The Philistines in the Bible were indeed the enemies of the Jews. And so it would be easy to surmise or assume that the Romans wanted to rename the area after the mortal enemies of the people they just conquered, that being Israel. And so they chose the Philistines and named it Palestina as a result. But the problem is, A, that name Palestine was already used at least for the southern part of that area, and B, that it was unusual, if not rare, for any Roman conqueror to name the area after the conquered people's mortal enemy. So then you can look at this little map that shows the Levant, the Southern Levant. This is, I hope I didn't just unhighlight because I wanted to avoid clicking in here and highlighting something. Anyway, under this, the caption for this little image here, the Levant in the 9th century BC, that's 900 years BC, that far back. There was the kingdom of Israel. Look what's there. The kingdom of Judah. Now, Israel was the northern half, and Judah was the southern half. And then over here, we have the Philistines in this little red zone here at the southern end of the eastern side of the Mediterranean. Then you have Edom below that. It was kind of between, like next to Saudi Arabia and etc. And above that, you have the area broadly called Damascus and Ammon, or all these various tribes. So we're talking about basically the eastern seaboard of the Mediterranean Sea and mostly the southern half of that. Okay. So they say they got this map from Wikimedia Commons for what that's worth, but I don't think it's grossly inaccurate or anything like that just because it's from Wiki. We don't want to commit a poisoning the well fallacy. On the other hand, there's reasons why nobody worth their salt will take Wikipedia as a valid source for anything because so many people can edit it and it's known to have very big biases. So, but pretty much every history has its bias. You've heard the phrase history is written by the victors, and history is the history of war. And so we have people conquering, reconquering, and third parties conquering the same spot of land over and over again. And each of them will rewrite the history. And so which bit of history you got at what point in history, as far as you can figure that out, will give you a different idea of what really happened there. I mean, I've said it before that even now, we can't trust our news sources. We can't trust official narratives of anything. And so it might not have happened as quickly in the past, but it still happened. And so anytime we appeal to history, we're appealing to what we personally think is the most accurate historic record. And that's going to be true of everybody. So if one person makes a claim and another makes a counterclaim, how in the world are you going to figure out who is right? But what's common today, especially regarding the Middle East, is one narrative that even so-called truth seekers want to go along with, which is Israel bad. Just like in the United States in prior elections, we had Orange Man bad, referring to Trump. And I don't want to say too much about that or, we get shut down. But the point is that when it comes to prejudices and inaccuracies, there's just nothing to say other than buyer beware. You just have to do your best and look up information as you can. And so what we have here is a general area called sometimes the Levant, and it's the eastern end of the Mediterranean. And at the southern end of that is this little section of land that 900 years before Christ belonged to the Philistines. Okay, now the Philistine people, as a people and a kingdom, did not survive. I forget how long they actually lasted, but anyway, the article here goes on to say that the Hebrew name Israel, source of modern Israel, had been understood to mean wrestler with God, which is, of course, what the Bible says. That's what Israel means, because Jacob wrestled with the angel of the Lord. What that was about, nobody knows, but that's what happened. And so then after the wrestling match, the angel of the Lord called Jacob Israel. So that's where the name came from. Now, this article makes it clear that they don't particularly believe the Bible's account of anything, and so they dismiss what it says about the Philistines. So we have to take that into account. And the usefulness of this person, and that they're an aspiring historian, just to let you know who we're quoting here. But it seems well written. I'll give them that. And they seem to have done some research. So that's better than most people do. So it's worth looking at. He doesn't find the claim convincing, which he just mentioned about the Hebrew name Israel, or if he's talking about the Palestine and whether Hadrian renamed it that. Jacobson's, the person he quoted, hypothesis requires that whichever Greek first used the name Palestine was aware not only of the name Israel, but also the traditional interpretation of its meaning in Hebrew. But I particularly honestly don't care what the Greeks thought of Israel. This is about the Romans. Now, this person has studied both Greek and Roman history. So, but I question why we're bringing or didn't know into a study of why the Roman Emperor Hadrian would have renamed something. So it's complicated. If nothing else, we'll come away from today's lesson with the idea that when somebody tells you how they know there's a Palestinian people whose land has been usurped and occupied, you can just flat out tell them they don't know what they're talking about, because nobody does. Nobody knows that. for sure. And I don't think there's much evidence for it. And then he quotes Herodotus on the Palestinian area. It's just too long of an article to go over the whole thing right now because there's more I want to cover because we need to get more than one source. They talk about Syrians in Palestine, which we know from with the history of Israel in the Bible about the Canaanites and all these other ites that were in the area, all these different tribes. So there was a lot of, people didn't just stay strictly in the boundaries of their country. They traveled and intermingled. So we have to be careful that we don't take some of these accounts out of context, in that if Herodotus, for example, mentions Syrians in Palestine, it doesn't say anything about who's, a kingdom or a king or anything, or if they have their own language or customs or anything like that. Because if we want to say there was a kingdom, we need some kind of artifacts or documentation or coins or something to go by, or a language, a Palestinian language. None of those things exist for a people called Palestinians any more than they exist for a people called Midwesterners in the United States. It's just not a thing. You lived in the United States, you might have lived in a particular part of the United States that is a collection of states called the Midwest, but that doesn't mean there was a Midwest kingdom, a Midwest coin, a Midwest language, any of that stuff. And it's the same for Palestine. Now, this guy goes on, or this, the writer of this article goes on to say that you can read a lot of history about Phoenicians and Syrians and all sorts of, and the Egyptians in the area, and who was or wasn't circumcised according to trying to figure out who were Jews and who were not, and whether other people did that. And it's just, there's a lot of detail here, which I'm pretty sure it would just, put everybody to sleep if I just read through that. I'm hoping I know I lost my highlighted section. I knew as soon as I clicked that one thing. But we can go down here. This is roughly the area. But what did Hadrian really do? Because people said, like that first article we looked at, I'll just show that real quick here, that Hadrian renamed it, and he did it for this reason, to erase Jewish identity. And he says, by this point, I think I've established the author's writing in the Greek and Latin languages long before the time of Hadrian, and frequently used forms of the name Palestine to refer to the entire geographic region between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, and in some cases even apply it to a much larger area extending as far as the Euphrates River. Now, would anybody say that there's no such thing of Arabs or any of the other Arabic nations in the Middle East just because the Philistines used to be, the whole area used to be called Palestine? That's a bad argument. It's bad logic. He also says, he or she, I have also established that some ancient writers like Herodotus and Ovid probably include Jews within the larger ethnic category of Palestinian Syrians. And this is something I've seen in many sources in the past that I've looked at, where Jews were at least included in the people called Palestinians when anyone was called a Palestinian. Because technically you could call, like you would say, a Midwesterner. I happen to live in the Midwest. You could call me a Midwesterner, but it's not how I identify myself as a nationality or an ethnic group. And then the article goes on, with these facts established, let's address the story about Hadrian's supposed punitive renaming of Judea as Syria Palestina in response to the Bar Kokhba rebellion that scholars like Feldman for, and that non-scholarly authors like Samuels repeat as fact. So here again, we have that situation that happens especially more and more online because information flows so fast, that there's one person who says something and then it's passed on and picked up by multiple people, and some of those become popular, and then they say, they kind of forget where they got this information, but they see it all over the place. And it all, if you investigate it, boils down to one person who really didn't even cite their sources. And this happens a lot. It happens with that ridiculous Piso theory of the Roman Piso family who allegedly wrote the New Testament and invented Jesus. So you have to be careful. But it doesn't make it any better if you go to the library and read the same biased or poorly sourced material. It's the message, not the medium. Anyway, going on here, in reality, all we know is that Roman inscriptions attest that sometime around the time of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, the Romans combined Judea and Galilee into a single province. The Romans did this which was given the official name Syria Palestina. And we can't ignore the Syria part either. Today there's a country called Syria, not exactly in the same place, but there is still no such country as Palestine. It's not a country. It's not a language. It's not a people. It's a mix, like Midwesterner. This reorganization and naming may have occurred shortly before or during the revolt. There's no surviving ancient source that explicitly says specifically when or why this change happened or who proposed it, although it could only have happened with Hadrian's approval, which is a kind of a big deal. He had to have approved it. It might not have been his idea, but it wouldn't have happened officially without his approval. Any statement about why the name was changed is simply a hypothesis. Always be careful about assigning motive, unless you can prove the motive, which you can't in this case. Anyway, that being said, it's a reasonably strong hypothesis that Hadrian may have combined Judea and Galilee into a single province and given it the official name Syria Palestina, which Greek and Roman authors had long used before as an informal geographic name like Midwest for the region, and which was less closely associated with a specific ethnic identity, at least partly in order to de-emphasize the region's historical association with the Jewish people. It's possible, this person is saying. We do not know this for certain, but it would make sense given the context and Hadrian's known attitudes. He didn't like the Jews. On the other hand, the claim that the renaming of the province was specifically intended to punish and demoralize the Jewish people by erasing the name Judea from the map is not well supported by evidence. There's no surviving ancient source that expressly makes this claim, and there's no recorded case of a Roman emperor ever renaming a province as means of punishing a particular people group. If it happened in the case of Judea, it would be a unique and strange occurrence. So, and then he says it really wouldn't accomplish much anyway to use that as a motive. It says, in fact, even after Judea was no longer the official name of a province, various writers, including many who were quite hostile to the Jewish people, continued to use the name informally, that is, Judea, to describe the region throughout the rest of antiquity and even into the Middle Ages. Okay, so you could easily, as easily call it Judea as you could call it Palestine. The fact that the exact time of the renaming isn't totally clear further complicates matters. Hadrian is recorded to have visited Judea in 130 AD, 2 years before the revolt, and it's entirely possible that he may have renamed it then, as some scholars in the past have argued. If he renamed the province before the revolt, the timing would make a specifically punitive interpretation far less likely. In other words, we don't know when he renamed it, and so because of that, we don't know why. In any case, this writer goes on to say he probably didn't think about it much. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't an overriding purpose. And the rest of this, and it has a few works cited, two works cited, the Jacobson and Ronald Syme, whoever that is. I don't know that name. So this is not an exhaustive historical document of any sort, but at the same time, it makes some good points about motivations, about the prior use of the term. And so we have enough to go on to say that this paragraph, without attestation or citation or anything, is something that may or may not be true. We can't rule it out, and we can't confirm it as to why it was named Palestine. The point is that there's no such evidence of a country or kingdom or nation or ethnic group called Palestinians, specifically, who wouldn't easily have been called Syrians or Jews. And then this article goes on to say, the second article, actually the first one I looked at, but in recent history, the area called Palestine includes the territories of present-day Israel and Jordan. See the map. So again, I've shown before that this is the original area that was supposed to be for Israel. It included Jordan, and this was called, the entire area was called the Palestine under the British mandate, the mandate for Palestine, that whole area, not just the Balfour Declaration. And then it gives a brief history of the area. During World War I, the British Army occupied Jerusalem, and then in November 2nd of 1917, that's when Arthur Balfour issued the Balfour Declaration for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. That doesn't mean they're going to chase out people called Palestinians. That's not what happened. So, because now I want to look at this quickly, this article about Mark Twain's visit to the Holy Land. He, as you may probably know, was an ardent atheist and was intending to mock the Bible in writing what he did about the area he visited, about how desolate it was. And so that's why they entitled this Mark Twain's Unwittingly Prophetic Vision for the State of Israel. So we'll look at this for a little bit. At his peak, Mark Twain was the most popular American celebrity of his time. What few realize is that it was an unlikely trip to the Holy Land that established his fame as an author. A century and a half ago, Twain traveled on an excursion with his American church group, which was more about honoring his mother than anything he believed, which obviously wasn't a Christian at all, to Europe and the Middle East. The material he gathered, first published in a San Francisco newspaper, formed the basis of the humorous book that made him hugely popular, The Innocents Abroad. He is, again, mocking the Bible's account of it. But while in the Middle East, Twain, whose real name was Samuel Clemens, was not focused on the book he would eventually write, but on another holier work, the Bible. He wanted to pick one up for his mother. While in Palestine, and that's the name that they've chosen to refer to the area, which is neither good nor bad, Twain took a piece of a stationery with Mediterranean Hotel printed on the top, just above the date, September 24th, 1867, wrote to a Mr. Elias, a bookbinder in the Old City, and gave him instructions into how he wanted this Bible fixed up and packaged. So he wanted to send this to his mother. Jane Clemens, from her son, Mount Calvary, September 24th, 1867. And he told them to put the name Jerusalem around on the cover, on the title, and send it to such and such a person to get it mailed to her. The King James Bible, published by the British and Foreign Bible Society, was an ironic choice of gift for the man who famously quipped, "Faith is believing what you know ain't so." A natural skeptic, Twain was not taken by the splendor of the Holy Land. He wrote irreverently about the country's legendary sights. The Sea of Galilee was, quote, "a solemn, sailless, tintless lake, as unpoetical as any bathtub on earth," end quote. The Church of the Nativity was, quote, "tricked out in the usual tasteless style observable in all the holy places of Palestine." So he's talking about how desolate it is, which is something to keep in your back pocket, okay? The area was desolate. Nobody lived there. In 1800s, nobody lived there except a few Bedouins. Throughout The Innocents Abroad, Twain explicitly states that the area was desolate and devoid of inhabitants. His group entered Palestine from the north, passing through such sites as the Sea of Galilee, etc., etc. Riding on horseback through the Jezreel Valley, Twain observed there's not a solitary village throughout its whole extent, not for 30 miles in either direction. There are 2 or 3 small clusters of Bedouin tents, but not a single permanent habitation. One may ride 10 miles hereabouts and not see 10 human beings. Where's the Palestinian nation is the point making here on this article about Mark Twain's visit there. Where is this Palestinian nation that the Balfour Declaration displaced? Where are they? He continues, of all the lands there are for dismal scenery, I think Palestine must be the prince. Can the curse of the deity beautify a land? Palestine sits in sackcloth and ashes. Over it broods the spell of a curse that has withered its fields and fettered its energies. Twain was not alone in his poor impression of the land of milk and honey. Historians and travelers alike make many similarly dreary observations over the centuries. 600 years before Twain's visit, another famous visitor with a famous name, nom de plume, was struck by Jerusalem's desolation. Rabbi Moses ben Nachman, known as Nachmanides, in the 1100s and 1200s, fled Christian Spain for the land of Israel. After a long and perilous journey, he arrived at a certain point in traveling to Jerusalem in 1267, where he couldn't even find 9 other Jews to pray with. That they needed 10 to make a quorum so they could have a synagogue, is my understanding. He wrote to his son, "Many are Israel's forsaken places, and great is the desecration. The more sacred the place, the greater the devastation it has suffered. Jerusalem is the most desolate place of all." There wasn't even any holy Islamic shrine there. And by the way, Jerusalem is never mentioned in the Quran. It's mentioned hundreds of times in the Bible. Nevertheless, the sage, whose Torah commentary is still studied, had an altogether surprising interpretation of the desolation he encountered. He saw it as a blessing in a disguise. Commenting on a verse in Leviticus that describes the curses that will befall the land of Israel, Nachmanides, or however you pronounce that, wrote the devastation constitutes a good tiding, claiming that during all our exiles, our land will not accept our enemies. That's to say, he's saying, of course it's desolate because we had to leave. And nobody's been there since until the Mandate for Palestine. And who was living in that area, who were called Palestinians, just as who would be called Midwesterners. That included all sorts of people, and not very many of them, of any kind. So he went on to say that Israel will remain desolate until the Jewish people assume control. But when the people of Israel finally return to the land of Israel, the region will once again flourish thanks to divine providence. Whether it's thanks to divine providence, the Bible does predict that they would, and I don't know what happened, my page just skipped, predict that it would, the desert would bloom again. So, anyway, as the most famous eyewitness to the 19th century desolation of Palestine, Twain was an unwitting collaborator of Nachmanides. Innocents Abroad brought global attention. I hate that word global. It's deliberate. It's everywhere. Everybody says global. It used to be worldwide when I was growing up. Attention to the sorry state of Palestine, and proved that Palestine was a land without a people, for a people without a land, just 15 years before the first Aliyah and subsequent waves of Jewish immigration. That is to say, before Jews started going back there, nobody was there. And it was a desolate place. Half a century after Twain's visit, the Balfour Declaration was issued in 1917. So 50 years after Twain, they made this declaration for Palestine. 50 years after that, there was the Six-Day War, which Israel won, because as soon as they got there, they were attacked. In 2017, 50 years after that, Israel continues to flourish. That's when this was written, 2017. Israel continues to flourish, moving in leaps and bounds away from Twain's sackcloth and ashes. It's a developed country. So, and then it says, at various points of the journey, Twain criticized his fellow American vandals abroad for the petty buying and selling of Holy Land trinkets, I can't blame him for that, and religious artifacts. So what compelled this skeptical father of American literature to buy an olive wood-covered Bible for his mother? Twain might not have known it at the time, but by reporting on the curses of Palestine during his visit, he was lending credence to the biblical passages he famously mocked in his book, prophecies which were fulfilled less than a few decades later. Likewise, Twain's decision to purchase a Bible over any other trinket is evidence that he was moved by the religious holiness and spirit of the land. Well, that's kind of speculating there. I think he just did it for his mother's sake. But everything he wrote about, his experiences there, and his choice of a Bible for his mother, undermined his own personal reasons for writing what he did, which is to say God forsook this land. But the fact that he wrote about it and many others corroborated his tale is proof that there was no Palestinian people there, no nation there, no coins, no culture for anyone to have usurped or occupied. Okay, so, and then this, back to this history of Palestine, the Ottoman Empire was dissolved at the end of World War I in 1918, and then the following April 19th, 1920, there was another conference convened by 4 World War I Allied powers, Britain, France, Italy, and Japan, adopting a resolution noting that the Mandate for Palestine will be responsible for carrying out the Balfour Declaration. There's too many L's and R's in there. It's not my fault. For the establishment of the Jewish national home. Why not? Nobody else was there to take it from. And after what happened in World War II, they had more reason to be there, I suppose, regardless of the number that is disputed of how many Jews were killed in in World War II. The fact is, many were killed, and I've seen people try to say that none of those prison camps existed and it wasn't Jews there, and everybody was starving, not just the prisoners. But that's not true either. I've actually seen footage. I wish I could find the name of the documentary I was watching years ago of black and white footage of the freeing of one of the camps. And they found there almost everybody was basically a skeleton in rags, except a few who were dressed in prisoners' clothes who were fat and healthy. And it turns out these were the prison guards who knew that they were about to be taken by the Allied forces. And they quickly put on prisoners' clothes. And yet it was quite obvious that they were well fed and nobody else was. And the commander who was deciding what to do with these guards was so incensed, he just said to the prisoners, "Have your way with them." And they beat them to death. They knew who the guards were. And it wasn't just, there were people dying in these camps under the watchful eye of guards who were not dying of starvation. And there are too many accounts of Christians who helped Jews to hide. There's a book called The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom, whose theology I totally disagree with on many accounts, but whose experience cannot be denied. She and her sister were in one of these camps, and her sister died there. And so be careful who you listen to. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on that because we won't get through all this, but the point is, there's nothing wrong with the Balfour Declaration, nothing wrong with the mandate for Palestine. And as I said, Israel was originally supposed to have a lot more land than they actually got. And now people want to take that. And trust me, this is leading up to Psalm 83 and what that means to what's going on today. In 1922, Britain allocated nearly 80% of that map of Palestine to Transjordan. That is to say, across or on, crossing over the Jordan. Thus, Jordan, the Jordan River, or is what the name is coming from, covers the majority of the land of Palestine under British mandate. Jordan also includes the majority of the Arabs who live there. In other words, Jordan is the Arab portion of Palestine. It's already been divided. There already is a two-state solution. That's what the mandate for Palestine was all about. And the Balfour Declaration simply said, okay, this part's for the Arabs and this part's for the Jews. In 1923, the modern Republic of Turkey, that is the successor of the Ottoman Empire, signed the Lausanne Treaty agreeing to transfer territories, including Palestine, to the control of the British Empire. Under British rule, the residents of Palestine were called Palestinians. A lot of them were Jews. Since Palestine included both modern-day Israel and Jordan, both Arab and Jewish residents of this area were referred to as Palestinians. That's who the Palestinians are. It was only after the Jews re-inhabited their historic homeland of Judea and Samaria, which nobody doubts they were there, after the Six-Day War, that the myth of an Arab-Palestinian nation was created and marketed worldwide. They exist to be political footballs, and the Arabs won't take in their own Arab brothers and sisters because they're needed to pick a bone with Israel. And they've got some bulleted points here about the marketing of these Palestinian people. Jews come from Judea, not Palestinians. To deny the historical tie of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, Arabs started using the name West Bank for the territories that were known as Judea and Samaria. And then they have a historical map. Let's see, I could open that in another tab, and hopefully that's not an image, it's a video. I'm not going to show that. It shows the biblical names of the so-called West Bank. There's no language known as Palestinian in Arabic. Even the letter P does not exist, which I think is funny because people go on and on about the letter J not existing in the Bible. Okay, if you want to use that ridiculous, stupid, ignorant, illogical argument, back at you with the word for Palestinian. There is no P in Arabic. There's never been a land known as Palestine governed by Palestinians. The great majority of Arabs in Greater Palestine and Israel share the same culture, language, and religion. Much of the Arab population in this area migrated into Israel and Judea and Samaria from the surrounding Arab countries in the past 100 years. Why'd they go there? Because Israel was fixing up the place. The rebirth of Israel was accompanied by economic prosperity for the region. Arabs migrated to this area to find employment and enjoy a higher standard of living. Even the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, Arafat himself, was not a Palestinian. He was born in Egypt. The famous Palestinian Covenant states that Palestinians are an integral part of the Arab nation, a nation which is blessed with a sparsely populated landmass 660 times the size of tiny Israel, which includes Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. The founder of the Israeli Arab Balad Party, Mr. Azmi Bishara, noted that there is no Palestinian nation. This is an Arab saying this, and that the Arabs in Israel is part of the Arab nation. In documents not more than 100 years old, I assume they're saying here, the area is described as a sparsely populated region. Jews by far were the majority in Jerusalem over the small Arab minority. Under the Oslo Agreement, the major source of income for Arab residents was employment in the Israeli sector. To this day, many Arabs try to migrate into Israel with various deceptions to become a citizen of Israel. Why? Not a citizen of Palestine? There's no place to apply. Google's Ngram Viewer, which maps the appearance of unique terms in books from 1800 to the present, documents the Palestinians' late arrival. Not even Google says there was a Palestinian nation, and they're certainly not biased in favor of Israel. A search for Palestinian state or Palestinian people turns up almost no hits before the late 1960s, when the number shoots upward. All attempts to claim Arab sovereignty over Israel today should be seen with their real intention: the destruction of Israel as a Jewish state and the only bulwark of the Judeo-Christian Western civilization in the Middle East. They are the only democracy there. Actually, it should be republic. Democracy is the wrong word, but it slips out sometimes. Anyway, any comments so far? We have a few more things to look at.
I find it fascinating because my remembrance of the education in school, Balfour was not taught to us. They began with the UN cementing the nation of Israel in 1948, and to say that before that, the Jews didn't have a place to live. They needed a place to live. But we see you're painting a very different picture here, that there was an ongoing effort that predated that to get the Jews back into their homeland.
Right. And I've sometimes shown a chart. I got too many tabs open right now. I don't want to risk opening another one, but of my prophecy chart on my downloads page, where it shows there's this kind of a dark gray to light gray band going across the center, which is the prophecy of the Valley of Dry Bones, which paints a picture of Israel coming back to life in stages over a long period of time, where the prophet sees a vision of this valley with just nothing but dry bones in it. And then God says something and the bones assemble themselves. And then they're covered with, muscles and tendons and skin, but they're still not alive. And then God breathes life into them. This is painting a picture of the long restoration of Israel. And so we expect this prophecy to be fulfilled over a long period of time, which is what I tried to portray in that chart that I made. I don't know if you can find that quick, Chow. It's on my downloads page of my usual links, in the charts and graphs or something like that. Or I don't know. I'll let you look for that. And I really appreciate that. Anyways, people can look at that. But the point is that, yes, these things happen over long periods of time. And there's a prophecy in the Old Testament where God says that, makes prophecies about the restoration of Israel. That doesn't mean that he can't use unbelievers to bring some of these things about, such as the Balfour Declaration, or what, regardless of anybody's motives, the fact is that God said it would happen, and it's happening, and they're there without life in them. They're there in unbelief right now. They don't have life in them because they have not yet returned to God. They're mostly atheists or Talmudists, and I don't care what their genetics are. There's a country called Israel in its ancient spot, and they're speaking Hebrew. And God knows who the real ones are. And in fact, there's prophecies that say that 2/3 of them will be wiped out and only a third will be a remnant and survive the judgments of God, the wrath of God that's coming. And so we expect them to be there in unbelief in order for the prophecies to be completed. So it doesn't surprise me that there are unbelievers in Israel and calling themselves Israelis. They don't call themselves Hebrews, as far as I know, but Israelis, because that's a secular nation. And when it comes to evil nations or evil governments, there isn't a government in the world who can point fingers to Israel and say that we're less evil than you. I mean, there's some horrible things going on in our own country that have been going on for generations that we just are finding out about, of just terrible satanic people. We got no moral high ground on Israel. No country in the world has moral high ground on Israel. And everybody has displaced somebody in their history. That's just how these things go. This is all political theater, but it's all prophesied political theater, is the point for us as Christians. So let me go on here to this article, The Forgotten History. And again, they're going to say that, oh, also, just by the way, Chow, I was thinking of another one from the Old Testament, in addition to that Romans 15:5, where God says, I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me. I declare the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come, et cetera, that I will accomplish everything I plan to do. And so prophecy is the fingerprint of God on the Bible. And that's why we're going to look at Psalm 83. But first, we got one more about Palestine. We'll try to get through here, the forgotten history of the term Palestine, and keep everything else in mind that we've said so far. Some think of the Palestinian-Israeli dispute as a clash of nationalisms. Others stress religious antagonism. Others see an East-West power struggle. On all of those can be true to some extent, but it's roundly agreed upon that a key element of the conflict is land. That land, for many years by many people, was called Palestine. Yet few people, including Middle East policymakers, journalists, etc., knew much about the history of the name Palestine or what territory it has at one time or another encompassed. Now, I'm not going to go over this again. I'm just giving you another source, but it'll say very similar things. And they also repeat the thing that the Romans renamed it punitively to Palestine. And you can take that for what it's worth. But the point is not who renamed it and why, but the fact that there's no such thing as a Palestinian nation or people or history or anything other than that. This was a very sparsely populated region ever since the Jews were thrown out of the land by God through the Romans. I mean, nobody disputes that just because the Romans came and displaced the Jews, that somehow this wasn't a prophecy fulfillment. Because that's the same argument people use today to say that just because there are Jews in the land doesn't make it a prophecy fulfillment. Well, yeah, it does. Anyway, it's widely thought, as reflected in this person's 1976 dictionary, that the term Palestine refers only to the land between the Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea. That's it. Countless books and maps say that Israel, in conquering the West Bank and Gaza in the 1967 Six-Day War, took control of all of Palestine, but that is not correct, as we already know from what we've gone over so far. Isaiah 46, I'd have to look it up, and maybe you can find something there quick for the chat, because I can't deal with that right now, but thank you. The term Palestine was used for millennia because this is just corroborating the other article, okay? Was used for millennia without a precise geographic definition, that is to say, like Midwest. Not uncommon, and this is the one that I was thinking of that had to say, think of Midwest or the Transcaucasus or, in Eastern Europe or anything like that. No precise definition existed for Palestine because none was required. Since the Roman era, the name lacked political significance. No nation ever had that name. The term was meaningful to Christians as synonymous with the Holy Land. So you can call it Palestine, you can call it Judea, and now it's Israel and Jordan and all the other, the nations around them. The land of Israel is the point, and Israel has artifacts there that are still discovered to this day of their ancient presence in that land. And before that, and they displaced the Canaanites and all the other ites that are listed in the, such as Hittites and Perizzites and Jebusites. And so, yes, if you dig down soil just about anywhere on Earth, you'll find layers and layers of civilizations. And this typical and sensible for if you conquered an area or it became devastated for some natural mean, that you would build on top of it. You don't dig the other stuff out first. You just cover it up and build on top of it. That's how things work. And so who was there first? The point right now is that there's no such thing as a Palestinian people that predated ever the nation of Israel. So it's as much their land, the Israelites' land, as it is anybody's, and they have a right to be there, and no less right than we do to be in America, or anyone else has a right to be where they are. If somebody else was already there before you, that's just how it is. And since biblical times, Palestine was understood to span the Jordan River. That's what Transjordan means. It was common to call the one bank Western Palestine and the other Eastern, as evidenced by such works as Edward Robinson, et cetera, Eastern Palestine was also known as Transjordan, meaning across the Jordan. In other words, the Jordan River did not bound Palestine. It bisected it. It cut it in two. In referring to the Jordan Valley in his book, Sinai and Palestine, 1863, Oxford University scholar Arthur Stanley said, it's around and along this deep fissure that the hills of Western and Eastern Palestine sprung up. So again, just more evidence that it was not the name of a country or a kingdom or an ethnic group in that area. Then they give a short answer and a long answer, and I'll let you read through all of that because we're running out of time. And I do want to get to Psalm 83. And before I do, I want to mention this playlist that I'm starting to watch. I've heard of this book many years ago. I wanted to buy it, but it's like several $100s. It's one expensive book called Footsteps of the Messiah and Ariel Ministries. And this is by Arnold Fruchtenbaum, who did the series. But this Australian branch of Ariel Ministries is reading through it and summarizing it, which I think is really helpful. So you might want to check that out. But in the description, which I'm going to have to displace some other tabs here so I don't risk anything by having too many things open. We've got some videos on prophecy of Psalm 83. And I want to just see if I can find the link called War is Coming. And I'm going to put that here. I'm not going to play the video, obviously. And just pause it there. This was done on September 29th. Now, you know what I've said before about not relying too heavily on things that have to do with constellations as relates to Bible prophecy, because there's signs in the sky, there's calculations, there's numerology, there's signs and visions and words from God, and then there's also just straight up exegesis. I put most of my emphasis on that one, but I consider all of them, as I said in my video from about a month ago, coming soon. It's good to get all when all the perspectives meet at a point, there's something going on. All right. And I just came across, as my further watching of what's going on in the Middle East, on September 29th, before the Middle East stuff happened, this person, on the basis of his avenue of study, which is to do with constellations, and almost, don't want to say astrology, but astronomy and some other things, just using things like stellarium, and which stars and planets are in which constellations at which time, that he predicted there would be another war breakout. On September 29th, he did that. And he did this video called War is Coming. And again, the link is in the description, but I think I can just, since I had to copy it to show that, I'll just put that there. You might want to watch that. I always speed things up when I watch them, so I may have missed something. But the point is, especially around the 35-minute mark here, it goes to 40, 46, 35 minute mark to about the 37 or so, he does a recap. So if you want the too long didn't watch version, you might want to do that. But then he did a follow-up on October 7th was the incident in the Middle East. So he did a follow-up on October 8th. And this is called War is Here. So war is coming, war is here. Did he just get lucky? Broken clocks right twice a day? I don't know. I'm just passing this on to you that he expected a war, and then you can watch the video to find out why, and then it happened. And he's talking about Venus entering into Leo. As I told you, that's what he's into. And but he's hedging a lot. You know, this is why I don't take any one thing, especially if I had to take one avenue, I would pick the exegesis route, not this one. But the point is, you might want to watch these videos just to see and make note of the date, which you can get. People are like, well, it says so many days ago or so many weeks ago. You can hover over it, and this pop-up, I hope you can see, I think you do on the screen, it says October 8th, 2023. Okay, so you can find out when something was run. And it talks about Psalm 83 and Palestine from about the 1150 mark to 1250. So if I go here to, let's see, I want to show you the map here where they talk about a possible Psalm 83 connection. I don't know if you looked at the thumbnail that I did of today's live stream, but I'm going to drag this over here. This is one I did on a prophecy video from a long time ago. We have several prophecies in mind here. One that hasn't been fulfilled yet is Isaiah 17. It has to do with the destruction of Damascus. That's the red circle in the middle here. That's why I have a number 1 by that. The color matches the circle. Isaiah, there's Damascus. The circle is around Damascus. Now, people will say this means Damascus is going to be nuked because it says nobody lives there. Right now, Damascus is just rubble, but people still live there. What the prophecy actually says is that no, people live there, but animals will graze there. So whether you believe in nukes or not is not important. The important thing is that although there's no people there, there will be animals. That's the state of Damascus that will fulfill Isaiah 17. That has not happened yet. Psalm 83 is the green circle. And you'll notice we got Jerusalem just a little, like at 6:30, 7 o'clock, if you go clockwise around from the red circle in the middle, is Jerusalem, not very far away from there. And that's all the countries around Jerusalem that are immediate neighbors or border Jerusalem or very close to it. These are all hostile Arab nations. All of them are mentioned in Psalm 83. If you look at the Psalm, there are many studies, and I'm just trying to hurry because I'm running out of time, where they mention the nations that need to be wiped off the map, or that are saying they want Israel wiped off the map. These nations are conspiring against Israel to say, let's wipe them out so that nobody remembers the name Israel. That's their motivation. They simply hate Israel and want to wipe it off the map. If the current incident results, this is a big if it results in Israel reclaiming all that mandate for Palestine, which is this area, if they get it back, I would say that's a fulfillment of Psalm 83. Now, what's the significance of that? And what's this big circle, Ezekiel 38? Ezekiel 38 is all the nations mentioned in Ezekiel 38 about that have a different motivation for attacking Israel. Good to see you, Dr. Law. They have a different motivation. They don't hate Israel. They're not trying to wipe it off the map. What they're saying is, wow, look at this country that just recovered from war that feels secure in the land. Why would Israel feel secure? Because of Psalm 83. Think of it. If they've had this little spit of land next to the Mediterranean, and suddenly they've got all of this land, they will feel much more secure. And it doesn't just say peace, it says security, because Israel has never had peace. But the word for peace can also be security. So what would the result of the Psalm 83 war do? Make them feel secure, and they've just recovered from war. And these nations say, look at them all vulnerable and having their guard down. They just recovered from war. We're going to plunder them. We're going to plunder them. That's their motivation. You can look at Ezekiel 38. And so the list of nations in Ezekiel 38 is that none of these in the Psalm 83 circle are mentioned. Why not? Because they're not there anymore. Because Israel conquered them. But of course, the result of the Ezekiel 38 war, they come down and gather on the mountains of Israel to take the place over, and God himself wipes them out. And this, in turn, opens the door to them making a deal with who they think is the Messiah, who appears, who is really the anti-Messiah, Antichrist. And there's a prophecy that says, we have made a deal with hell and with the grave. We've made a deal, a covenant with death. And they don't realize that that's what they've done. But do you see this sequence? Isaiah 17 will probably happen about the same time as Psalm 83, I'm guessing, because it's in the area that will be reclaimed by Israel. And that in turn leads to Ezekiel 38. And that in turn, their defeat at the hands of God, this Antichrist swoops in to fill the vacuum and say, here I am, I did this. And they'll make a deal with him that involves them getting their temple back, which the Antichrist will violate 3.5 years later. So that's why what's happening right now is very important to watch. Not that I think it's absolutely must be a fulfillment, as some have jumped the gun a little bit and said, I'm saying you have to wait and see the outcome. If Israel winds up with all this, then that's probably a fulfillment of Psalm 38. And especially if Damascus winds up with no people left in it, but only animals. I'm saying this because even though I don't know whether Christians will be here for the conclusion of these things, I only know that we won't be here when the wrath of God begins. And the wrath of God begins with the first seal, because God, the Lamb, is opening the seals, and things happen on earth because he opens them. And the first thing to happen is the appearance of the Antichrist. So it could be on or about the time of the Ezekiel 38 war when that covenant is signed. Now, the tribulation begins with the 7-year covenant. It does not begin with the rapture. The rapture happens before the signing of the covenant, because we won't be here to see the Antichrist revealed, which we would certainly do if we were here. And so 2 Thessalonians 2, etc., makes it clear that we have to be out of the way. So anyway, all of that to say, be educated on what is going on right now in the Middle East so that you know the world you live in, because Jesus chastised people of his day for not knowing the time they were to expect him. Okay, and I don't think I have anything else I needed to show in here now. I'm just telling you this ahead of time so you too can watch Damascus and Syria and Jordan and all these areas, and see what happens as a result of the current activities in the Middle East. If this is it, if this is Psalm 38 or Psalm 83, I might have said Ezekiel 38 and Psalm 83, they're two backwards numbers. It's not fair. Anyway, if that happens, if Israel rhymes up with a lot more land, watch out for what happens next. Okay, so life can change at the flip of a switch from normal to devastating without warning. And this is why Jesus said, watch. You don't know when the Son of Man is coming. You don't know the hour. He says, know the time you live in. And that's what we're trying to do right now. But in order to know the time you live in, you must know what the truth is about the area called Palestine. And that's why I did this. Yeah, so not peace. Let me look at the chat a little bit. You can see Nathan. And yeah, it's the word typically translated peace also means security, which isn't necessarily peace. So when Israel dwells in the land securely, you can't be secure with the amount of land they have now. But when they get rid of their immediate enemies and take over all their land, they will feel secure. And immediately after that, these outer ring of nations who have been really fighting a proxy war in the inner ring will finally have to get involved themselves. And when they do, it won't go well for them. But then comes the Antichrist. So it's wave after wave of things. Life is changing rapidly while we watch. We already know how many other things have changed rapidly in the last 5 to 10 years. So it's picking up speed. And when anyone will tell you if you're on a river and it starts getting faster and faster, you need to get out of there or be prepared to go over some rapids and maybe a waterfall eventually. So prophetically, that's what we're seeing. The water is picking up speed very quickly. And the only way to really prepare for this is spiritually, because there will be no escape physically anywhere in the earth. This is a time to make your peace with God. And I've got always the narrative under the description in the videos how to do that. So basically, Jesus offers you adoption as God's children. It's a gift to be accepted or rejected. Nobody will force you to take it. Um, God will honor your decision. If you don't want to be with him for eternity, he'll grant your wish, whether you like it or not. But right now is the best time to accept the offer, not because people don't already suffer and not because of fear, but because you genuinely want to be reconciled to your creator. That should always be the motive. And thanks to you also, Nathan. I just wish as many Christians would support the channel as you do and hope you can join us soon as being one of the Christians, because nobody wants you to go through this stuff that's coming. It's going to be horrific. And so, but there's horrific things happening already to some people. It's not about fear of suffering. It's about seeing that you're approaching the rapids and trying to give people warning so they can escape them. And Jesus said, pray that you may escape these things, because he wasn't a fearful person at all. Absolutely. So yeah, accept the gift being offered while it's still a gift, because there's coming a time as when the gift is withdrawn, and it's all about endurance. That's why the most of Revelation talks about endurance, because it's not talking about the church. Anyway, read up on the history of the Middle East from various sources, hostile and friendly. Get a sense of what's happening. I've given you some resources today. I've given many others in the past. And know the world you live in. Just watch the Middle East. Don't put it off getting right with God, because there just isn't much time left from what I'm seeing. So anyway, I have no idea what I'm covering next week. I do like to have things to present, to be prepared, but we'll see. We'll see if we're even here next week. Nobody knows when the rapture happens or how much time between the rapture and these the tribulation, which again begins when the Antichrist signs the 7-year covenant, because it's 3.5 years later that's broken. In my opinion, again, on that chart, let me see if I can go find that chart now. Let me close this one. And we'll go right here to here. I don't know if you already got the link, Chow. Sorry, I wasn't paying attention. Let's see. Is this a video? Oh, that's the other one. I want this one. I recently changed my own website and wasn't sure where I wanted to go. Let's see. Where did I put that chart? Not that one, not that one, not that one. That one. That's the one with the dry bones prophecy across the dark gray to light gray bar. Let me get you this link. Yeah, and people ask me about if I done a video on this or that. I have over 800 videos. I don't even know. I think Droid and Chow have better ideas of what I did when than I do. Anyway, plus I'm getting older and it's not my fault. So dry bones prophecy is in Ezekiel 37, oddly enough, just before Ezekiel 38, what we just mentioned. And then after 38, 39, about that Gog-Magog war, is Ezekiel 40 through 48, which is about the millennial kingdom that follows the tribulation. So it makes sense to me. That's all I'm saying about a slowly unified kingdom of Israel. And right now they're in the, as far as the dry bones are concerned, they're the bones have skin on them and everything, but they're not alive yet. And that's what one of the purposes is of the tribulation. In my opinion, there's an overlap here during the seals. Most people put the seals in the first half of the the 7 years, so 3.5 years. I kind of think there's between the rapture and the signing of that covenant, the seals happen. And so anyway, my opinion, take it for what it's worth. Thank you for coming. And if Jesus leaves us here another week, when we'll see you here then. Otherwise, we'll see you someplace else. Anything you'd like to say to close out, Droid?
Just thank you for having me. Appreciate the lesson. I hope everyone enjoyed the lesson. I thought it was wonderful, and I pray that you guys have a wonderful day in the Lord. May the Lord bless you this day.
Amen. And everybody take care, and we will see you then.